Hi, OpenXML developers. I've had a question a couple of different times of how can I move content of one cell in one particular document into another cell in a different document. If you're familiar with OpenXML, you know that moving content from one document to another, it's a little bit tricky because there's all of this interrelated markup. Content might refer to an image. Content might refer to smart art, which itself refers to an image. And when you move that content from one document to another, you have to grab all of the related parts and move that over. So you can't just go grab the markup of a cell and put that into a cell in another document. If you did that, it would be a pretty brittle process. It would break pretty easily. Well, Document Builder takes care of a lot of these issues associated with interrelated markup. If this is the first screencast that you've seen on Document Builder, I suggest that you go look at some of the other screencasts about Document Builder in the Document Builder Resource Center on openxmldeveloper.org. There's a fair number of intro topics. There are some screencasts that go into Document Builder in a great deal of detail and explain how Document Builder was built. There's also another screencast that shows how to import content into, for instance, a cell using Document Builder. One aspect of that is you can't specify the contents of another cell to import into that cell. You have to specify block level content that is child of the body element. Let's see how we can do this in any case. We can still use Document Builder to do the heavy lifting for us, and we can also import just the contents of one cell into another cell. Now, to demonstrate this technique, I'm going to just use the stock version of Document Builder 2.2. Let's first go download Document Builder 2.2 and get ready to do a bit of development. Here we are at the Power Tools site on Codeplex. You can find this at powertools.codeplex.com. And for doing a bit of C# development, we don't need the entire Power Tools download. Instead, we can come to the Downloads section here, and we can download the Power Tools Core 2.2. That's all I need. Save it where you want to save it. And now I'm going to open up the solution in Visual Studio 2010. And we want to play around with Document Builder, so we can use one of these examples that are here for Document Builder. Let's look at example Document Builder 01. This will work. So here we have source1.docx and source2.docx and source3.docx. Well, let's say that we want to import the contents of a cell in source2 into a cell in source1. I'm going to modify this code a little bit. Initially, I'm going to just take all of the contents of source 1 and source 2 and concatenate them together into a single document. And I can get rid of the rest of this example. I only want one example here. It's going to create a document called out1.docx. Let's save that, and now let's go prepare our source 1 and source 2. We can get rid of source 3. We don't need that. So in source 1, I'm going to get rid of most of this text. I'm going to insert a table. This is going to be the table that is going to contain the contents that we're going to import from source 2. I'll create a 3x3 table. So this is source 1. Now I'll open up source 2, and one thing I want to do in source 2 is I want to put some contents in a cell. I'm going to grab this image here, select everything. I am going to insert a 3x3 table. I'm going to alter this, and I'm going to say this is in line with text. That would be a typical way that you would put an image in a cell. You could do it any other way you want to. It doesn't really matter. And another thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a comment here. Just to clean things up, I'm going to delete the image and the header and delete that text in the header. We don't really need it. I'm going to save it, close the header and footer. So now I've got content in the first cell in this table in this source2.docx. I'm going to modify our example over here just one more time. I'm going to change this argument to fault, and that says I'm not going to be including the page headers and footers from these documents. That's not really germane to our example that we're working through here, so let's keep it simple. So now I have a little program. It takes source 1, source 2, it imports the two, and creates a new document out1.docx. Let's run it. And it ran and completed. So let's go look at out1.docx. And this is what we expected to see. We see the table from the first document and we see the table from the second document. So now let's manually go about the process of using Document Builder to bring the contents of this cell here into the first cell in this table. I'm going to take source 1 and source 2. I'm going to copy them. I'm going to put them into a folder called Save Away so that I can get back to the original documents pretty easily. First thing I am going to do is I'm going into source 1 and I'm going to tell it that I don't want to concatenate these two documents. Instead, I want to put all of source 2 into the upper left cell of the table in source 1. So to do that, what I want to do is I want to supply an ID to this source. I'm going to call this my special cell. I'm using this overload that it only takes a WML document and it takes a string insert ID because I'm going to want to use that insert ID. I'm going to save this away. So now I have two sources. One source is a plain old ordinary source and the other one has this ID of special cell. Now I'm going to go manually modify source 1. Here's our table, and here's the first cell. This is where we want to insert the contents of the upper left cell in the second document. In order to do what I want to do to this source1.docx, I need one more namespace. I need the Power Tools namespace. We can find this namespace. It's in pt openxmlutil.cs, and I want this namespace here, powertools.codeplex.com/documentbuilder/2011/insert. I'm going to copy that namespace. We're going to note here that the element names and attribute names I'm going to want is the element name is insert and the attribute name is ID with an uppercase I. I'll add my namespace there and I'll paste in the namespace that I want. And my namespace abbreviation is PT up here. So let's go down here into this cell and I'm going to get rid of this content here. Just delete that. And I'm going to insert PT : insert ID is equal to special cell. So now what I've done is I've inserted this special element at this special location in my document where I want to insert the contents of the upper left cell from the second document. Further, I've modified my example so that instead of declaring my source in the way that we've always done it, I've assigned an ID to that. So this ID here, special cell, maps up to this ID on this pt:/insert element. So let's save everything and let's run it. Now let's go look at out1.docx. And what you're going to see is I've inserted the entire contents of that second document into the upper left cell in this table in the first document. Well, so far so good, but I only want the contents of the upper left cell. So what can I do to do that? What I can do is I'm going to go back to this location. I'm going to edit source2.docx, and I'm going to modify the markup of the main document part. I'll format that markup. So here are the contents of that second cell. It runs from right here, here's the comment, and here's the second paragraph that contains the image, from there to there. And I'm going to cut that to the clipboard, and then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to select all the contents of this document except for the body element. Just delete all that, and I'm going to paste that content right back in there. So all I have done is I've taken the contents of that cell and I've promoted it up so that it now is child of the body element. I'll save that, and now let's run the example again. It runs that quickly, and now if we look at out1.docx, we can see that we have just the contents of that upper left cell in the upper left cell of our source document. Well, now let's write a little bit of code to actually go in and modify those documents programmatically so we get the exact same results. This is what we want to see happen. We did use Document Builder to make this happen, but I modified the markup by hand. So now let's go and write a bit of code to do that same markup modification. Now I'm going to go into this Save Away folder. I'm going to grab my source 1 and source 2, and I'm going to paste them back here and replace those. So now I'm back to my original source 1 and source 2. So now let's write a bit of code to do those modifications. Here I'm going to write a bit of OpenXML code. I'm just going to write it on the fly. So using word processing document wdoc equals word processing document.open source 1. And I'm going to tell it I'm going to open it passing true in there, meaning I want to open it for read-write. Now I'm going to get the X document for the main document part, so I'll go. Oh, but in order to get the X document, I have to come up here and declare that I'm using system.xml.link. This is using the getXDocument method of Power Tools for OpenXML. Now I want to find the TC element of interest. In order to find that TC element, I probably want to find the table of interest. So X element of table is equal to xdoc.descendants. You'll want to modify this code as appropriate for your scenario. You may be surrounding a table with a content control, so you may need to find the content control and then get the table inside of it. You might have a special paragraph right before the table that you can look at that special paragraph and identify that table. There are a number of different ways that you can use to identify content in an OpenXML document, you have to use one of those ways so that you know what table you're going to modify. And now let's say that I want to modify the upper left cell. So the next thing I want to do is get the first row. So this will get the first row. If I wanted to get the second row, I could skip the first and take the second. And then let's say I want the first cell. So now, as I said, you're going to want to structure this per your particular scenarios. Sometimes I've done examples like this and someone will come back and say, but it doesn't work because I can't use this code to pull the contents of the second cell over and the second cell down into the fourth cell over and the third cell down. Well, this process of finding your source and destination cells, that's outside of the scope of this particular example. I'm showing you how to use the plumbing of Document Builder to pull the contents of one cell in one table into the contents of another cell in a different table. So now we have our first cell there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace the contents of that first cell with our special insert element. I'm going to tell it I want to replace nodes. And what I'm going to replace those nodes with is a new X element. My class name is PT OpenXML. And this is my namespace name. Let's look at it again. Yeah, this is a namespace. And now I need to add my attribute. And I'll call it special cell. Now I've made that same modification to that document that I did by hand. So now let's put it back. And we're done with modifying that first document. Now let's go write the code to modify the second document. I'm going to open source 2. Again, I'm going to find the first table, the first row, and the first cell. And now I'm going to get the cell contents. I'm going to take all the child elements of the table cell, and I'm going to filter out the table cell properties, if there are any. Child element such that child element.name is not equal to TCPR. And I'm going to list this. And the reason that I'm going to list this is I'm going to go into this document and I'm going to do some replacing of elements. You run into this problem where I'm querying on this document at the same time I'm going to be replacing things. So I eliminate the process of querying on the document at the same time I'm replacing by calling toList. So now I just have a list of X element objects. And now I can go xdoc.descendants. I'm going to go find that w.body element, and I'll go first or default. I can actually go first. There's no valid Word document that doesn't have a body element in the main document part. So I've got that body element, and now I'm going to go replace nodes, and I'm going to replace the nodes with cell contents. So now in this second document, I've done the exact same thing programmatically that I did by hand. I went and found the cell contents of that first cell. I got just the contents. I called toList on that query so that I don't have the problem where I'm modifying the XML tree at the same time I'm querying the XML tree. That in general is bad. And then I went into my document. I found the body element. This code right here gets the body element of the document, and I replaced its child nodes with these contents that I got from that cell. And then after that, I do the calling of document builder in the exact same way that I did before. So let's save this program. Let's go and look at our source 1. It looks like what we had before. Look at source 2, and this has the contents that we're going to move into the first cell in the first document. And let's look at out1.docx. And it tells me the file out1.docx cannot be opened because there are problems with the contents. Let's go take a look at that and see why I have that. Now I see what the problem is. The problem is if I look at pt-openxml.cs, this ID is not in a namespace, but when I added the ID to my insert element, I put it in a namespace. This needs to be just like that. Let's go back into Save Away, grab our two source documents, paste those in. Now let's run. Let's look at out1.docx. And now we have exactly what we intended to have. We pulled the contents of the first cell in source 2 and inserted it into the upper left cell in source 1. Key point is, when you go to implement some variation of this code, you must decide how you're going to identify your various cells. You have to go then select the various cells. In the case of the destination document, you need to insert this special element at the place where you want to insert the contents. And in the source document, you need to get the contents of the cell and effectively modify the document so that the entire document contains just the contents of that cell. The net result is we're able to programmatically move the contents of one cell in one document into another cell in another document. That's all I'm going to cover in this video. Thanks for watching. Come back often to OpenXML Developer. Follow me on Twitter at EricWhiteDev. You can find my blog at ericwhite.com. Talk to you later.